Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I hope that everyone had an amazing Thanksgiving dinner and you spent time with your friends and your family, and it was all just the greatest turkey you've ever had and the best mashed potatoes. I'm Danny, and of course, this is Silent Motive, where we explore the strange, the unsettling, and the chilling mysteries that just don't quit. Today, we are getting our first official snow of wintertime. It's beautiful, and hopefully, we will keep it for the rest of the year and the holidays. It's been coming down since this morning, so yeah, might as well just dive into it. On today's episode, we are actually going to be talking about the murder of two young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German. But before we get too deep into it, don't forget to give us a like, follow, share, subscribe, or even a rating wherever you are getting your weekly dose of Silent Motive. And don't forget to turn your notification bells on so you never miss an episode. This is actually a fun little fact. This is my first episode that I researched that was suggested to me by a listener who wasn't a friend or family member. So shout out to you. You know who you are. Thank you for the recommendation. I had actually never heard of this case until the listener brought it to my attention. And if you or someone you know has a case or something that you'd like me to do an episode on, feel free to reach out and let me know on Instagram, or you can even leave me a comment on YouTube. Now, go ahead and make yourself a delicious drink and settle in, because this one is a wild ride. And of course, you do not want to get caught with your pants down. Before we do get started, this is your general trigger warning. All the warnings I can warn you to be warned. Proceed with caution. This is the Delphi Murders, the voice on the bridge. Delphi, Indiana is the kind of place most of us will drive through without ever really seeing. With a population just under 3,000 people, a town of church steeples, a few stoplights, a CVS on the corner, and kids riding their bikes there in the summer. A place that feels safe almost by default. The kind of town where a day off from school means sleeping in, maybe playing some video games, maybe going outside if the weather cooperates. On Monday, February 13th, 2017, school was out. A scheduled in-service day for teachers. For 14-year-old Libby German and 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams, it was just a bonus freedom in the middle of winter. Libby was the girl with the quick smile and the camera that was always nearby. She loved taking pictures, loved playing softball, and she loved her family. Abby was a bit more reserved. She was artistic and funny in that dry way that lands hardest when you know her well. Kind of like me. They were best friends, and they bonded basically by the fact that they were at that in-between age where you're not a kid anymore, but you're not an adult, and no one really treats you like a teenager either. That morning, the girls slept in at Libby's house. Sometime around midday, they decided they wanted to go hiking on the local trail system, specifically the Monon High Bridge. It was an abandoned railroad bridge that towers about 60 feet over Deer Creek. The wood slats were worn and uneven, gaps between them made your stomach flutter if you looked down for too long. If you look at pictures of it now, it kind of feels eerie. But before February 2017, it was a local hangout spot. Kids took photos there, couples walked it on lazy afternoons, just a casual place in the woods. Around early afternoon, Libby's older sister, Kelsey, agreed to drive them out to the trailhead. Sometime a little later, after 1:30 p.m., Kelsey dropped Libby and Abby off near the entrance of the Delphi Historic Trails. She watched them walk toward the path, Two girls in hoodies and jeans heading out for a simple hike. It's a moment she's replayed countless times since. There's something about that last casual goodbye that becomes brutal in hindsight when you realize it was the last goodbye. At about 2:07 p.m., Libby pulled out her phone. On her Snapchat, she posted a photo of Abby walking ahead of her on the bridge. It's the image we all know now. Abby in a light jacket, hands in her pockets, walking the narrow center of the Monon High Bridge. You can't see the danger. You can't see what's coming. It looks like any other teenage girl photo. A girl on a bridge, a friend behind the camera, capturing the moment because that's what we do now. This would be the last post Libby's family and friends would see on her Snapchat. That 2:07 p.m. timestamp would become one of the last known moments when everything was still okay. The girls had arranged to be picked up later that afternoon, but when the time came, they weren't there. At first, it was the kind of worry you could rationalize away. Maybe they lost track of time, maybe they walked a little further on the trail, maybe they didn't have signal. Families called, texted, tried to reach them. There was no answer. I would be absolutely losing my shit at this point, like level 100 crash out. But by late afternoon, that thin layer of rationalization started to crack. This just wasn't like them. Around 5:30 p.m., the Carroll County Sheriff's Office was contacted and the girls were officially reported missing. As daylight faded over Delphi, a small town did what small towns do best. They mobilized. Friends, family, neighbors, firefighters, law enforcement, they all fanned out across the trails. Flashlights sliced through the dark. Searchers called their names into the trees, down into the ravine, across the open fields. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in a place like that when you're searching for a person. Every snapped twig sounds like it could be them. Every shadow looks like a shape. But the girls were nowhere. That night ended without answers, which I'm sure was utterly heartbreaking for the families. The next day, February 14th, Valentine's Day, the search resumed. More intense, more organized. Search teams focused again on the area near the Monon High Bridge and the surrounding woods. In the early afternoon, a volunteer searcher made a discovery in the wooded, rugged area off the trail near Deer Creek. 2 bodies. They were soon confirmed to be Liberty German and Abigail Williams. Police would later describe the crime scene as, quote, odd and different, end quote, using carefully chosen language that suggested what they'd found was disturbing, but they kept critical details back. The bodies were located in a secluded area on the edge of the creek. Both of the girls had cuts to their throats, which were likely the cause of death. Libby was disrobed and had blood on her clothes and hands. Abby was found in jeans and a sweatshirt with blood covering her throat. The way the bodies were arranged was what brought a different kind of alarm to the investigators. The bodies were found a few feet from each other, covered in sticks and tree branches. Some theories were that these sticks were assembled in a way that was possibly intentional and deliberate. Investigators also found an unspent .40 caliber round in between the 2 girls' bodies. This piece of evidence would become a vital part in the case. For Delphi, that day split time in half. There was before Abby and Libby went to the bridge, and then there was after. The town's sense of safety shattered almost overnight. Parents watched their kids more closely. Doors that had never been locked before started getting double-checked. And hovering over everything was one enormous question. who could do something like this here and why. Within days, law enforcement held press conferences urging the public to come forward with any information. At first, they released only general statements. 2 teenage girls murdered near the Monon High Bridge. No mention of what else they had. But they weren't empty-handed. Libby German, at 14 years old, had done something extraordinary. Her phone. Sometime between that 2:07 p.m. Snapchat photo and the moment everything went wrong, Libby hit record on her phone. On that device, investigators found a short video clip of a man walking alone on the bridge towards the girls. Jeans, a blue jacket, hands in his pocket, and his head down. The image is grainy, zoomed in across the length of the trestle, but clearly a man alone. Police would come to call him simply Bridge Guy. More importantly, Libby had also captured audio. In early releases, authorities just shared a few seconds, heavy footsteps on gravel, and those 4 words in a low, commanding male voice.
Guys, down the hill.
That short clip, a few seconds of sound from a frightened girl's phone, became one of the most infamous pieces of evidence in modern true crime. Investigators believed that voice belonged to the person responsible for Abby and Libby's murders. Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty, would speak later publicly about what his granddaughter had done. He talked about how proud he was that in that moment she had the presence of mind to start recording. In his words, he was glad she had the wherewithal to capture that image and that voice, hoping it would be a vital piece that would lead to an arrest. It's a heartbreaking kind of heroism. A teenager sensing danger, using the only weapon that she had, which was her phone. Very quickly, police released 2 still images from the video of the blurry figure on the bridge in that blue jacket, head slightly bowed, walking with a heavy, deliberate gait. The tip lines lit up. The story went national. And frankly, this is why I don't watch the news. It's always awful stories that will just break your entire soul. Everyone looked at the photo and thought the same thing. I know someone who walks like that. It became the kind of case that burrowed into people's minds. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime, it was the fact that the killer's face, or at least his outline, and his voice were out there in the world, and still no one could put a name to him. Over the next weeks and months, investigators conducted hundreds of interviews. They collected DNA, searched properties, chased down leads. Some potential persons of interest were publicly scrutinized and then ruled out. At one point, the investigation looked into a man named Keegan Klein, who would be linked to an online catfish account that had contact with Libby prior to the murders. But his admitted crimes, that of child sexual abuse material in a separate case, did not lead to charges in Abby and Libby's deaths. Keegan would be convicted of those charges in Indiana and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Seems like Indiana doesn't play around with child predators. I wish I could say the same for other states. In July 2017, police released a composite sketch based on a witness who reported seeing a suspicious man in the area around the trail system. This first sketch depicted an older-looking white male with a goatee and a cap. For years, this was the face people attached to Bridge Guy. Then, 2 years later, in April 2019, investigators did something no one expected. They released a second composite sketch. This time, the drawing looked significantly younger, clean-shaven, no hat, sharper cheekbones, and different hair. There was confusion and frustration as people tried to reconcile the 2 images. Which one was real? Had the investigation taken a new direction? Why hadn't they shared this sketch sooner? Police said the second sketch was now the primary image and that the first sketch was based on a different witness. The shift raised questions, but publicly, those questions were never given any detailed answers. The thing that's odd to me about it is the initial sketch more or less matched the man in the video way more than the second sketch did. In Delphi, life moved on, but only on the surface. Year after year, the town held vigils, purple and orange ribbons, signs that read "Justice for Abby and Libby," pictures of the two smiling girls who had never made it into adulthood. People whispered about suspects: a neighbor, a drifter, someone from out of town. Others insisted it had to be a local, someone who knew those trails, knew that bridge, knew where you could take two girls and vanish from sight so quickly. Behind the scenes, investigators kept working. They went back over old tips. They re-interviewed witnesses. They followed up on overlooked details. Somewhere in that evolving maze of information, one name began to surface more clearly. A man who had been in Delphi the whole time. That man would be Richard Matthew Allen. Richard Allen was a married father who worked as a pharmacy technician at the local CVS. If you lived in Delphi, you might have had him behind the counter, printing your photos, filling your prescription, bagging your snacks. He blended into the background, just another middle-aged man in a small town. He also lived only a short drive from the Monon High Bridge. What the public didn't know until years later was that Allen had actually come forward early on in the investigation. In 2017, he reportedly told a conservation officer that he had been on the trails that day, February 13th, around the time Abby and Libby were there. That information was documented and then somehow got lost in the flood of tips for years. It would take until 2022 for that early contact to resurface in a meaningful way. I can't really understand how that didn't get looked into right away, regardless of the amount of tips that were coming in. I can guarantee that that dude would have been my key witness or a potential suspect instantly. In October 2022, just over 5 years after the murders, word spread that there had been an arrest in Abby and Libby's case. On October 26th, Allen was taken into custody, and a few days later, authorities held a press conference confirming what everyone had been holding their breath about. A suspect had been charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. For the families, it was a complicated moment, a mixture of relief, shock, and the realization that the legal process was only beginning. At first, almost all of the evidence was kept under wraps. The probable cause affidavit, the document explaining why Allen had been arrested, was sealed by the court. Rumors started to fill the community. People speculated about DNA, confessions, accomplices. Theories multiplied online, some grounded and some outright conspiratorial. The sleuths were sleuthing, basically. Eventually, after media organizations pushed for transparency, a redacted version of the probable cause statement was released in November of 2022. It gave the world its first look at the case against Richard Allen. According to the affidavit, multiple witnesses placed a man matching Allen's description and the bridge guy image on or near Monon High Bridge around the time Abby and Libby were there. One witness described a man walking with a kind of creepy vibe. Another recalled seeing a man in a blue jacket and jeans with the same general build as the figure from Libby's video. But the most striking detail was something small. something that normally would have gone unnoticed. The unspent .40 caliber round that was found near the bodies of the girls. Later, forensic testing linked that round to a Sig Sauer P226 pistol owned by Richard Allen. Investigators said tool mark analysis indicated the bullet had been cycled through Allen's gun. In addition to that, Allen had allegedly admitted to investigators more than once that he had been on Monon High Bridge Trail on February 13, 2017, around the time of the murders. He said he'd gone out for a walk alone. He also described that what he wore that day basically matched almost perfectly to Bridge Guy's clothing. It was a simple statement, but in the context of everything else, the video, the voice, the bullet, the witnesses, it took on a different weight. Over the next 2 years, the case made its way through the legal system with delays, motions, and a swirl of controversy. Allen's defense team, in a series of explosive findings, tried to argue an alternative theory that a group of so-called Odinists, or supporters of a fringe white supremacist twist on Norse paganism, had staged a ritual killing and that their client was being framed. The claims were dramatic, but of course they went viral online. Hell, they even had a ritualistic expert take a look at the crime scene, and she stated it could very well be. But a judge later ruled that jurors would not hear the Odinism theory in court, finding no solid evidence to support it was a real alternative suspect scenario. Meanwhile, Allen remained behind bars, moved to different facilities, his mental and physical condition becoming a point of concern and contention between everyone. Then, in fall of 2024, the case finally went to trial. In October 2024, opening statements began. Prosecutors laid out their core claim that Richard Allen was Bridge Guy, the man in Libby's video, and that he had lured Abby and Libby off the bridge and down toward the area where they were found later. One prosecutor bluntly told the jury, Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, tying the figure on the grainy screen directly to the man sitting at the defense table. Prosecutors said that Allen had admitted to the murders more than 60 times while incarcerated, confessing to his wife, his mother, family members, the prison warden, the psychologist who treated him in prison, other prison employees, and other inmates. These confessions were made in person, over the phone, and in writing. For the first time, jurors, and later in part the public, got to see and hear more of the video that Libby recorded. Libby had kept recording even as the situation shifted from a normal hike into something neither of the girls had words for. For years, we only knew about the still images and that short audio clip.
Guys, down the hill.
But in 2025, after Allen's conviction, a longer portion of that video, about 43 seconds, was released online by a group working on his appeals, and multiple outlets reported on its contents. In that extended clip, you can hear the girls' nervous voices, talking quietly about the path, one of them noting there's no path, where the man seems to be leading them. There are sniffles, the sound of footsteps on wooden slats and gravel, and then the familiar command from the man behind them.
Guys, down the hill.
A state police master trooper who had listened to more than 700 of Allen's prison phone calls testified that the voice of Bridge Guy is the voice of Richard Allen. At trial, witnesses described seeing a man in clothing similar to Allen's that day, even recalling a muddy, disheveled figure walking back from the trail around the time the girls would have been attacked. Forensic experts testified about the unspent .40 caliber round found between the girls' bodies and how they concluded it was ejected from Allen's gun. Others explained how cell data, the timeline, and Allen's own admissions all fit together. The defense did what they could to create doubt, pointing to the blurry nature of the video, the limitation of tool mark analysis, and the years-long gap between the murders and Allen's arrest. They highlighted investigative missteps, including the fact that Allen's early tip about being on the trail had been misplaced for years. They argued that the state was building a case around the evidence rather than letting the evidence speak for itself. But in the end, it was the jury's story that mattered. In November of 2024, after hearing weeks of testimony, a jury found Richard Allen guilty on all counts, murder and felony murder for both Abby and Libby. The following month, Allen was sentenced to a total of 130 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. In the courtroom, members of Abby and Libby's families had a chance to speak. They talked about the two girls who loved sleepovers, art projects, softball games, and silly selfies. They talked about empty chairs at birthdays and holidays, the quiet spaces in the house where laughter used to live. They spoke directly to Allen, telling him what his actions had taken from them. For many, that verdict and sentence marked the end of a long, agonizing chapter. The man prosecutors said was Bridge Guy had been named, tried, and convicted. But in another way, the questions have never fully gone away. Allen's legal team has continued to fight, working on appeals, pushing their claims into higher courts, pointing again that what they saw are flaws in the evidence, in the investigation, and in the trial itself. Supporters have launched websites dissecting the video, arguing over transcripts, and floating their own narratives about what happened on that day on the bridge. Outside the courtroom, the story of the Delphi murders has taken on a second life online. Forums, podcasts, YouTube channels, journalists, and amateur sleuths all poring over every minute detail. Some are careful, respectful, and evidence-based. Others veer into something more reckless, turning real people's trauma into puzzle pieces in a game they can't lose because they never had anything at stake. Meanwhile, in Delphi, the Monon High Bridge still stands. There is a Libby and Abigail Memorial Park that was built to honor the girls, a place for families to gather, kids to play, and the community to remember more than just the worst thing that has ever happened there. It's a way to reclaim space, to say this town is more than just its tragedy. But if you stand out near the trail on a quiet evening, when the wind moves through the trees and the last light fades, it's not hard to think about what happened. Two girls walking ahead on an old railroad bridge. A man behind them, hands in his pockets, closing the distance. The uneasy glances, the hushed voices on Libby's camera as they tried to decide which way to go. The realization, too late, that something is wrong. And then that creepy voice. Guys, down the hill. We know so much more than we did in 2017. We know the name that a jury attached to the voice. We know about the bullet, the gun, the witnesses, the 5-year gap, and the 130-year sentence. We know about the missteps, the theories, and the defense that went nowhere. But some things we still don't know. We don't know the exact words spoken after the camera stopped recording. We don't know why Abby and Libby were targeted that day out of everyone who walked on the bridge before them. We don't know what might still be buried in the minds of people who were there or nearby, or who heard something that never quite made sense and chose to convince themselves it wasn't anything. But most of all, we don't know why. Why did Richard Allen take 2 teenage girls' lives that day? There is the official story, the one written in affidavits and verdict forms. And then there is the story the girls carried with them into those final moments. The fear, the courage, the choices, the thoughts that never made it to the microphone or a witness stand. That story lives somewhere between a few seconds of video and a trail that drops off into a ravine where the trees close in. Somewhere between a girl's shaky breath and a man's command. Guys, down the hill. Well, that's it for this week's case. Thank you all for sticking around for another episode of Silent Motive. Remember, every silence has a motive. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow us for a new episode every Monday where we dive into another modern mystery that blurs the lines between creepy and criminal. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have any cases or spooky stories you'd like me to do an episode on, head over to Instagram, drop me a direct message. You can follow us on Instagram at silent_motive_pod. And like I said, feel free to shoot me a message on any episode recommendations, and I will do my best to getting around to all of them at some point. Oh, and if you do give me a recommendation on an episode that you want done, make sure to let me know if I can give you a shout out if I do end up doing that case. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.